What harm reduction looks like in my community might be very different than yours, but the spirit of harm reduction can be applied anywhere and everywhere.
You know that uncomfortable space where things aren't neat or solved? What if that's where the real healing starts? Today's conversation leans into that gray area, the space where our instinct to fix meets the deeper need to simply be present. When we let go of control and step into curiosity, we make room for safety, dignity, and real connection. That kind of community can change everything. Hi, I'm Delaney Manager. I'm a student here at Vanguard University, and I help produce this show. Today, Sandie talks with Priscilla Ward, a licensed clinical social worker who trains faith leaders and community teams in trauma-informed care and harm reduction. And now, here's their conversation.
Priscilla Ward, I am so excited to have you here at the Ending Human Trafficking podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm very, very excited to be here.
Well, you and I have served together on the Faith-Based Action Committee for our Orange County Human Trafficking Task Force for a very long time. And we've been having this conversation offline and decided it was time to bring it to the podcast. So let's dive in. Priscilla, you've spent nearly 2 decades helping individuals and families navigate trauma, anxiety, and loss. What have you learned about people and what they need most in their healing journey?
Great and loaded question. I think the probably top thing that I have really taken away from all of the work that I've done is that people heal in community. We heal in relationship. Connection is a critical part of the process of the journey, but connection and relationship have a lot of complex elements that are required to really happen. And sometimes it doesn't look linear. In fact, most of the time, it's not linear at all. It's very complex. It's very complicated, especially when we are truly serving those that have been through and are actively going through really challenging, traumatic, tragic things.
So when you talk about healing happens in community, particularly in the faith-based community, we want to welcome in survivors of any kind of abuse, but we're talking especially about human trafficking today. And sometimes our faith communities have a lot of rules, really, that make the belonging piece a little challenging. We have the belief piece in place. We all trust God, but the behavior to follow what the community sees as very standard and what is acceptable behavior. And so having that kind of a community context for someone who is just starting to engage in a healing journey, that can be a very challenging circumstance for the survivor, the victim, and for those of us who have really good intentions. So how can trauma-informed practices move beyond therapy rooms and begin shaping our systems, our faith communities, our schools, our correctional settings? Those are the places that survivors encounter every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. There's so many structures and expectations that exist in so many environments, including faith-based communities. And the huge shift that really needs to happen internally is understanding that our goal of fixing or rescuing is part of what needs to change. when we are in service of others, we are not necessarily need to be focused on chasing an outcome. It's about being in service of somebody who's hurting in whatever way and learning to sit in our own discomfort, learning to sit in the messiness, learning to sit in the gray. So much of a prerequisite of belonging for Jesus was not compliance, was not behavior change. And it's learning to lead with that, even when we are uncomfortable. And the reality is that oftentimes we approach things with this lens of what's wrong with this person. When we see a behavior, an action, something that we deem is wrong or bad, what is wrong with them? And making the shift to internally ask ourselves, what happened? What happened to this person? What happened in their life? What happened in their childhood? That this is the way that we are seeing them. This is the way that they are showing up, and finding that deep compassion, even when it is messy, even when it's uncomfortable. And we can apply these principles to every setting, whether it's corrections or social services or a church. Learning to lead with that heart of what happened to this person and where can I find that opportunity to connect? Where can I really center dignity and compassion and meet them where they are? That's the beginning of building belonging for folks.
So you talked about us approaching this as we're going to fix it. And so when you talked about what approaching with a what's wrong with this person, I finished that sentence in my head with, and how can I fix it? I'm a firstborn daughter. My job is to fix stuff for the people around me, my siblings. And that fix it mentality is not going to be helpful. It reminds me of a podcast I did with Stephen Kin from Project Kinship. Yes,
love Steve.
And they have like a motto on the wall that says, "We don't save people, we serve people."
Yes.
And I think that's the beginning of developing this attitude of what happened and how can I serve on your healing journey.
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about that trauma-informed faith and introduce a topic that's sometimes a little uncomfortable in faith communities, whether we're talking Christian or Muslim, where we have strong context for behavior expectations. So you frequently train faith-based organizations on trauma and harm reduction. And so how do you approach those conversations?
I think it's really, really important for us to connect and where we overlap. So what do we all agree on? We all agree that it's important to serve people, to take care of people. We want to do good. We want to love people. And I add the element of these conversations, the trauma-informed care conversation, the harm reduction conversation, is us taking that one step further. I don't believe it's enough to love people. I believe we have to learn to love people well. And learning to love people well requires us to step out of our box and learn things that are sometimes uncomfortable. But if me learning about trauma-informed care, if me learning how to embody that, if me learning about harm reduction is going to help me love you well, then we're living out our purpose.
Okay, so let's get down to basics. What is the definition of harm reduction?
Harm reduction. So like you mentioned it, this can be a sticky topic. And sometimes there's some pictures that immediately come to mind. But before I start talking about even any examples, I think it's so important that we are really grounded in the fact that harm reduction is far more than a list of strategies. It's truly a philosophy that's grounded in a set of principles that at its heart is about meeting people where they are. It's about honoring their dignity, even when they aren't ready or able to stop certain behaviors. And it takes a pause to really acknowledge that abstinence isn't always realistic or accessible, and small steps, any small steps, they count, they matter. Our goal with harm reduction is literally just what it says, harm reduction. It is to reduce harm, because if we can reduce harm, whether it is a critical injury, a critical illness, death, that means that we have an opportunity to help people move along in their journey. If they're not here, we can't help them. And that's the goal of harm reduction. It's also a starting point. It's not the end all be all. There's a lot of other elements that need to exist for folks to be whole on their journey of healing. But harm reduction is an incredible starting point, because it does allow us to center that dignity, that compassion, autonomy, which is so important when working with survivors, and really focusing on reducing the risks rather than eliminating them entirely. And that's part of that shift from rescuing or from saving. And really learning that this can look different in every context. What harm reduction looks like in my community might be very different than yours, but the spirit of harm reduction can be applied anywhere and everywhere. So thinking about examples, I think sometimes we have these big, scary examples that come to mind, like syringe exchange programs or safe use sites. Sure, those are some examples of harm reduction, but there's so much more. So I like to remind people, if you brushed your teeth this morning, that's harm reduction.
Uh-huh.
If you wear a seatbelt, that's harm reduction. So those are examples that are not all the way in, that far end of the spectrum. And that's important to remember. There is a spectrum. We all fit in a different part of the spectrum.
And I think back to my personal experience and my life in serving in another country. When I was in Athens, Greece, I worked with various nonprofits that reached out to victims of human trafficking. And in my basket, when we went out to engage mostly girls on the street who are victims of human trafficking and have all the elements of human trafficking, force, fraud, and coercion almost always. And so in my basket, I've got cookies. I have a thermos of hot water to make tea or coffee, and I have condoms. Mm-hmm. And when some of my friends went out with me, they're like, oh, you're giving out condoms. And it's like, well, I care about these girls. I see some of the same girls week after week. I just want them to be safe. Yeah. And if that's what I have to do, that's what I'm going to do.
Yes. Yeah. And that is spot on. It's bringing in this non-judgment, truly. You don't have to agree with what is happening behaviorally to be compassionate and supportive and offer practical help, practical support that's going to reduce the likelihood of maybe these young girls acquiring some, deadly disease or illness, lots of different things. And so, again, we are reducing harm. We're not co-signing on behavior. We're not saying, I agree with this. Yes, go and continue. We're saying, hey, this is happening. So how can I help you be safer if this is your reality? Because I want you here. I want you here tomorrow and the next day and the day after, because the longer you're here, the longer we have an opportunity to build that relationship, to build that belonging that's going to help us move into that healing journey.
And one of the things I've observed is that harm reduction and stages of change actually intersect.
Yes.
Can you speak to that stages of change model as
Yes.
we are looking from our faith lens to expectations and where the survivors or victims may actually be?
Yes. Okay, so I'm just going to hit the stages of change so we're all starting on the same page.
Okay, yeah.
So first is pre-contemplation. When we look at pre-contemplation, that's somebody that's like, I don't have a problem. I don't need to change this behavior. This is my reality. Some people might call that denial. It's not even on the radar that this is something that needs to change. Contemplation is like, okay, maybe there's an issue here. I don't know that I'm ready to do about it. Maybe this isn't the best for me. Maybe there's another option, but I'm not ready to do anything. Then comes preparation. Preparation is when somebody says, okay, this is something that I want to change in my life. I want to change it. I need to change it. What do I need to start learning? What do I need to start connecting to? What resources do I need to start putting into place so that I'm ready for my next stage, which is action? And action is the really doing the work. It's taking all of the resources, the connections, the relationships, the services, the support, and starting to actively work towards change. After preparation, we're not done. Then comes maintenance. Let's say you were successful. You got to where you wanted to go. Now we have to help you maintain, because that's oftentimes the most difficult thing. When things get challenging, it's easy to do well when things are moving just like we want them. But when things get difficult, it's a lot easier for us to fall back into old patterns, or to start seeking the reassurance that is familiar to us, or to tap into sometimes survival strategies that are not the most helpful outside of just surviving. So maintenance is super important. And then I say there's sometimes one more. This doesn't always happen. It often does. And that's relapse, a relapse of the behavior, because maintenance is so difficult. And then when there's relapse, we've got to go through this process again. It can go a little bit more quickly, but it depends on the person. You know, I tell people, like, a relapse can be a bump in the road, or it could be a mountain. When that is going to help us determine what we do. So when we overlay harm reduction with this, and we think about the folks that we're interfacing with, you're going to be interfacing with survivors at all stages of this process. If somebody is in pre-contemplation and we are saying, you have to do this, this, and this, and this is required in order for me to be here with you, in order for me to care about you, in order for me to encourage you, in order for me to serve you. And they're like, I don't even know if this is a problem in my life. That's not going to work. But if we bring in that harm reduction lens and we say, like, hey, I see that there's a lot going on. Let me just share some resources and some information with you. And when you're ready, you let me know. And, you know, it looks like you're hungry. It looks like maybe you could use some supplies that could keep you safe. Let's talk about that. How do we help you access that? Do you know where to access that? So it's important that we meet them there. And that gives us an opportunity to start getting to know somebody. So that the key when somebody is in pre-contemplation is getting to know them enough to where then we can compare and contrast where there's discrepancies in their own beliefs. So if somebody is let's say they're in like active drug use, right? And they're saying, you know, like, I want to be a good parent. I want to have a solid family. If we've sat around long enough to connect with them and meet them at that stage, we can say, you know, I'm really confused because I hear you say you really want these things in your life, and at the same time you're living this life of active use. How's that gonna work? And we're not imposing, we're not demanding, we are not expecting. We're leading with curiosity, and we're allowing them to say, you know what, that is a little bit mismatched. That's how we get them into contemplation, and then, you know, continue to progress from there. But again, that harm reduction lens, when we're not coming in to fix, we're coming in to help you stay safe long enough so that we can build this connection and have these types of moments and conversations. That's what's going to get us there.
Well, and your description of that parallels my experience as a nurse over the years, many, many times working with newly diagnosed diabetics. And the whole idea that we have to eliminate a lot of sugar from your diet. That takes off the plate M&Ms and cake and pie. And so there's a great sense of deprivation. And my patients have gone through all of those stages of change, and relapse is really common. And think about your own life. You've got friends, I know, who are diabetics, and then you serve the most amazing chocolate mousse cake, and they can't have any. And so then they relapse and their sugar goes high and it's bad for their health. And our community hasn't supported what they need to change. And so we sometimes substitute with harm reduction strategies. We have a gluten-free, sugar-free substitute cake. That's a harm reduction model.
Yes.
And it's such a good example. If I'm willing to do that at the church potluck, then I think theologically it demonstrates compassion.
Yes.
And so curiosity and compassion takes what we know and puts it into action.
Yes.
So this idea of building compassionate systems where we're all competent in leading with curiosity instead of fix it, that takes a lot of energy. It takes self-reflection, and it's exhausting sometimes. Actually,
Yes.
a lot of the times. I've been doing it for a few decades. So in your work as a social worker, training educators, leading on your church staff, working with other clinicians, have you had to address secondary trauma and maybe even burnout?
Absolutely. I think this is a critical topic that we could do a whole other podcast on. And I think for a long time, it was overlooked. There is a cost to caring. There is a toll that it takes for us to love people well. And I think it's really, really important that we understand that taking care of our own wellness, of our own well-being, of being healthy, right? If I'm going to show up to be of service and try to help somebody along their journey, I need to be a healthy person in the room. I don't need to be perfect, but I need to be healthy. And understanding that taking care of ourselves is a critically important part of the process, because when we don't, we will devolve into these patterns of behavior that will sometimes reinforce the harm that others have already experienced. And again, it's good intentions, but when we're so tired, when we're so exhausted, when we're so burnt out, that it's like, I don't have time to be curious. I don't have time to ask not one more question. Just do the thing. Here are the 3 things you need to do. Just do the thing.
Okay, now you're getting too close for comfort here, because when I'm tired, I just want to fix it.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Let's look at the future, at the kind of systemic and cultural changes that we want to see in how our teams create environments where both the helpers and the survivors can thrive.
Yes. I think if we go back to trust being the bridge for change, that will help us to really focus on consistency, that will create safety for us, for survivors, and that will really allow growth to happen. If we're consistent, every small act will help to literally rewire the brain of the survivors and of all of the other people that we're serving. Now, this is tapping a little bit into understanding of trauma-informed care, but there's also science that backs up that we heal in community, that we heal in relationship. Because our brain is responsive to what's happening. And if all my life I have had people really exert power over me, really like reinforce compliance, and this is what you have to do, and when you do it, and how you do it, and you report to me, and we come in and we say like, hey, I care about you, and I want to know you, I want to understand you, I want you to be safe, I care about your safety, whatever that means. The brain is like, wait, what? What is this? And neuroplasticity starts to kick in. But the more people have these experiences, the more likely we are to create these safe and whole environments. This is what leads to that like systemic change, because we start really centering connection, not the correction of behavior. And it's so important that we do that. With all of that, we also really start leaning in on the reality of people's lives and leaning in with a listening ear to say, you tell me what you need. Instead of me showing up and telling you what you need, let me listen and you tell me what you need. The voice of lived experience is so important in this. We can have lots of ideas, and that's okay. We can have lots of great intentions. That's okay. But if we're not listening to the voices that are living these lives, that are enduring these challenges, we're not going to get very far.
I love leading with curiosity, engaging with compassion, and I want to continue this conversation. Priscilla, how can people reach you?
So a couple ways. One, it would probably be easiest to head to my practice website, which is compassrosepsychotherapy.com. There's a little form there where folks can shoot me a message if they would like. I love these conversations. I think it's really important. And folks leading with curiosity into this is also how we mobilize change.
Well, I am so looking forward to future conversations, and I will make sure we have a link in the show notes. Thank you so much, Priscilla.
Thank you, Dr. Morgan.
A huge thank you to Priscilla Ward for joining us today. One of her most important points was how communities don't have to be perfect to be safe. They just have to be consistent. When we shift from trying to fix people to creating trust, connection, and room for their own pace of change, we actively support their healing. And her explanation of how harm reduction fits with the stages of change gives us a clearer lens for what support can really look like. Listeners, if you loved this conversation, make sure you check out our website at endinghumantrafficking.org for tons of in-depth show notes and other resources. And if you'd like to help us grow this podcast, you can start by sharing this episode with someone and connecting with us on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. As always, thank you for listening.